So let's welcome Samuel.
Any superhero fans here? Go ahead, raise your hands. Any superhero fans? As a global culture, we're in love with superheroes. At least the box offices seem to say so. Growing up, I loved superheroes. The idea that someone just like me could change the world with powers captivated my mind like you wouldn't believe. Growing up, my hero of choice was Wolverine. He was always so edgy and wasn't as polished as someone boring like Superman. He was more complex and flawed. No matter what superhero you may have grown up with, there are three things that characterize our heroes. One, let's just come right out and say it. They're superheroes. They have superpowers, right? That's awesome. Number two, they had an average side. Maybe they were a nerd like Peter Parker, or they had a secret identity like Superman, or maybe they were like Storm and just happened to stumble upon their powers. Whoever they were relatable. And number three, most important of all, they had a weakness. It sounds grim, but they had a weakness. They had a flaw, something that made them imperfect. And that is how we connected to them. That is how we related to them. Think about this. How exciting would a Superman be without kryptonite, right? No kryptonite? No thank you. That's boring. The unstoppable Superman saves the day again. No tension in that story. See, we need a hero to have a flaw to make them vulnerable, just like we are. So let's delve into this a little bit more. The weakness part. See, these heroes have stories, and their stories are not centered around their weakness. It's just a part of their story. I want you to think about this. Imagine if the whole narrative of Superman was about him getting over his severe kryptonite allergy. That wouldn't be very fun. He wouldn't stop moving trains. He wouldn't stand up to that pesky Lex Luthor, and all because he's just focused on fixing himself. It's miserable. Superman is super because he has superpowers. He just also happens to have a challenge. Do you know the saddest part, though? How many of us have incredible superpowers, have strengths, talents, and interests, and we dedicate our whole lives to fixing ourselves? It's tragic. See, many people, especially neurodivergent people, spend their whole lives in their struggle area. They try to fix themselves to never realize their beautiful potential. Do you want to know something, though? There's a way to break free from this cycle. So come with me on an exciting and heroic journey today as we first explore these superpowers that we call neurodiversity. Second, investigate the biggest obstacle standing in the way of our superpowers. And third, uncover a revolutionary solution to this obstacle. So first, let's understand neurodiversity. Earlier, I used the word neurodivergent. Neurodiversity refers to the fact that there's this intrinsic diversity in our brain function, and that certain things that are often classified as mental disorders are actually things like autism, ADHD, auditory processing disorder, dyslexia, etc., are differences, not deficits. You see, our brains exist amongst a continuum, and on that, we are not binary. This is not like we like to typically think. There's neurotypical or normal and other. The reality is that we exist on this broad spectrum. And like most things in life, our brain fits into, a bell curve, into a standard deviation. And our brains actually function perhaps similarly, but then as we move out to the fringes, we start to see more diversity. And that's where the excitement is. We usually like to think that of this standard deviation, our brains can be on one side or the other. But the reality is that there's actually a unique term that challenges this assumption. And this exciting and unique term is twice exceptional. Now, there are many definitions for this word, and I'm going to use the one that was created by my mentor and her colleagues. Twice exceptional individuals evidence Twice exceptional individuals evidence exceptional ability and disability, which result in a unique set of circumstances. Their exceptional ability can mask or cover their disability. Their disability can mask or cover their ability, and sometimes, the most complicated of all, they can cover one another. See, these individuals are characterized by great asynchronies. Think high highs and simultaneously low lows. I want you to think Simone Biles, Greta Thunberg, Alan Turing, Richard Branson, right? Individuals who have incredibly asynchronous profiles, but we celebrate. And returning to our bell curve, I told you that these individuals resist simplicity. They're simultaneously straddling that bell curve. One foot firmly planted in the struggle area, another firmly planted in the strength area. And that's complex and so exciting. So Dr. Baum, my mentor, went on to, for you visual learners, describe it with these colors. Using yellow to describe gifts or strength areas, using blue to describe challenge or struggle areas, and using green to describe the whole person. And this is key. The whole person is always green. We may sometimes see struggles, we may sometimes see strengths, but twice exceptional individuals are always in possession of both assets. Now, one of the most important things that we keep in mind is that these unique profiles beg this interesting question. What does it even mean to be gifted? Right? If someone is simultaneously strong and simultaneously struggling, are they in fact gifted? And as society, we have always liked this kind of singular definition, right? This idea that I'll call schoolhouse gifted. It's actually a narrow set of skills, the ability to do well in school, right? Or what we often rely on is IQ, right? Historically, we would rely on IQ or intelligence quotient. And in this talk, I'm going to beg you to move beyond the classroom and beyond IQ, because giftedness is so much more. To take a better look at giftedness and understanding intelligence, we're going to take a look at Dr. Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences. You may have heard this before, but the theory states that people are not born with intelligence as a fixed commodity, right? That we actually have intelligence that is far broader than what might be considered schoolhouse gifted or cognitive abilities. Gardner introduced actually 8 different intelligences that range from linguistic and logical, things that you might see in school, mathematical, but also spatial, bodily kinesthetic, musical, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and naturalistic. See, this is quite revolutionary because Gardner is challenging the idea that there is what's referred to in psychology as G, or general intelligence. He calls on us to broaden our understanding of intelligence and giftedness and look for its presence, not just in the classroom, but everywhere. And do you know the ramifications of this? You know the realization? Well, if intelligence isn't fixed, if it can be discovered elsewhere, if it can grow over the course of a life, then perhaps it can be cultivated, right? And if intelligence can be cultivated, then that means that environment and setting matter greatly. So speaking of environments, our twice exceptional individuals are incredibly affected by their environments. Again, if we have pronounced strengths and pronounced struggles, we can have a high intelligence in one domain and struggle in another, and that can leave us pronounced in difficult ways, right? If the setting is everything. Take Simone Biles, for example. Simone Biles has ADHD and has reported to have struggled in the classroom growing up, but on the mat, the goal speaks for itself, right? What's changed? Not Simone, but the setting, the environment, right? But sadly, many of our students are struggling because of the setting. Sadly, the educational setting for many neurodivergent students is a square peg in a round hole, right? And much of society is focused on changing the kids to fit into the hole, shaving off their edges. And this is a colossal issue. It's not only harmful to the individuals who constantly feel as if there's something wrong with them and that they need to change to fit in, but it's harmful as a society. This leads us to a societal issue, and that leads us to our second problem. We need to investigate the biggest obstacle that stands in the way of us developing our superpowers. And we typically think, when we think of our superpowers, we think of developing strengths and talents, curiosities in school, right? But the trouble is that that's not necessarily the case. You see, the education system, unfortunately, is often more at odds with developing strengths than it is cultivating them. And moreover, the education system doesn't stand alone. Society is often not aligned with the education system as well. So if we have a look at modern education, we know that the modern education system here in the United States was born in the turn of the 20th century, right? And that kids were really using it to get ready for factories, to get ready for industrial work. It was an industrial era, and we needed industrial schools. This was called Taylorism. Not that kind of Taylorism, but this kind of Taylorism. Named after Frederick Taylor, the founder. And Frederick Taylor was using a system called scientific management. And the idea was that during the progressive era, that there would be a scientific approach to getting maximum efficiency out of people to get maximum output in factories, right? If you've been to a school, you know, bell schedule, timed lunches, rotating classes, obedience, all of these elements, they make for a good factory worker. But the reality is that we're not in an industrial era anymore, and the system is outdated. The trouble is that we're in an intellectual era, and school hasn't kept up. In some ways, we've actually seen the educational system stay quite strong and steam on while society has changed and evolved around it. See, over time, education has become much more convergent. We're converging to the mean. We're needing to do the opposite, however. We're needing innovative, different, creative, unconventional thinkers. And the truth is that the young minds of today are often not nourished by this convergent thinking. These minds are ground down. And to make matters worse, outside of school, it also seems that we've adopted this productivity ideal that we worship. Right? The goal isn't being productive. Our goal as a society needs to be more. Our goal needs to be self-actualization, both as an individual and as a collective. Right? And if you're not familiar with this term, Dr. Abraham Maslow has created this hierarchy that you've maybe seen. The idea is that we ascend, right? That we work towards living a self-actualized life. Dr. Maslow describes self-actualization as a person's self-fulfillment, as the tendency to become the best version of oneself, that idea of ascending or transcending and becoming rich in various aspects of our lives. Isn't that what we want? I mean, not only as individuals, but as a collective, not only as parents or as students, but as a whole global society. Right? This is what we're going for. And imagine the mosaic effect here, right? I think the mosaic is the perfect metaphor because it serves as a both collective beauty, but also maintains its individuality. And examining one of the pieces on this mosaic, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my own personal story. This is deeply personal for me because I have always struggled as a student. At an incredibly young age, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and I always struggled. It took me 7 to 10 times longer to read or process or keep up in the classroom. I was always getting there earlier and always staying after. And I learned from a very young age that there was something wrong with me. I wasn't school smart, I was school stupid. And I internalized that. And the only thing is that I had unique skills and strengths, but they just didn't seem to matter in the classroom. The narrow range of skills that the class was testing for wasn't aligned with my superpowers. And it's not just me. I run a school full of kids who are just like me, and sadly there are too many of us to count. And it's tragic because it's a cycle. Right? We're all beautiful and we have these talents in these certain domains where we're so strong, but our attention is trained on fixing ourselves, on bringing the bottom up. I want you to think back to the absurdity of the Superman example that I gave earlier, right? Imagine Superman spending his whole life trying to get over his kryptonite allergy, never going out and helping and so forth, right? But to put this in an even better way, I want to turn to my mentor's mentor, Dr. Joseph Renzulli, one of my favorite educational psychologists. He once said, "No one cares about Picasso's ability to do complex math or Einstein's ability to paint. So why are we so concerned with everyone being good at the same thing?" It seems absurd when we think about it this way. We know Picasso, we know Einstein, we don't care about what else they did, right? But why is it that education is so focused on people being a little bit good at everything? We deserve better. We need better. The next generation requires better. And the message should ring loud and clear for everyone, but it's especially true for our neurodivergent individuals. People who, by definition, have strengths and struggles that are more pronounced, more asynchronous, and ring loud. The truth is that when we focus on our deficits, we lose, and we lose big. Okay? Now, I can point to the absurdity of this in education, but I'm actually going to show you a comic which does this far better than I ever could. So if you take a look here, you'll see all these different animals next to a tree, and there's a teacher, and the teacher is saying to them that for today's exam, everyone has to climb the tree, right? Which we know is ridiculous. This is ludicrous. All of these different animals have these different strengths. And to make this even more, I think, impactful, there's a quote that's alleged to be attributed to Einstein. I'm not sure entirely, Einstein's like Mark Twain. Half the things that he said, he never really said. But everybody is a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will spend its whole life believing that it's stupid, right? Why is it that we have to do the same things and jump over the same hurdles? Why are we doing this to ourselves? And why have we accepted this? Surely there has to be a better way, right? Well, there is. And that's where we're going to go over to the third part here. Let's uncover a revolutionary solution to this obstacle. After college, I'm going to tell you a little story here. I went off, my first job was teaching in France. I was part of this Fulbright teacher exchange where they took 14 French teachers, sent them to America. I always joke that they got ripped off, and 14 American teachers and sent them to France. And we were part of this pedagogical exchange. I lived in France for 6 months, and one of the most amazing things was that I noticed how the French just seemed to systemically grasp self-actualization and transcendence, right? Their whole education system is aligned around this concept. Now, I'll be the first to say that there are problems, right? They test at a very young age and sometimes put people into tracks because of standardized testing, but they're doing one thing incredibly well. They truly invest in the interests and passions of their future generation. And if someone wants to be a server, or someone wants to be a beautician, or a janitor, there are schools for that, right? And people can go there and study with pride, not fall back, but lean forward. And I visited these schools, and they're incredible. And this rings out into society. There's so much more than just cultural fulfillment in school. It's bleeding out into a collective national self-actualization. And it's not a coincidence, right? Education invests, society benefits. And what happens when school leads to this more rich society? Let me give you an incredibly palatable example. So when I was a teacher here in the States years ago, I would tell people that I was a teacher. How do you think they would respond? Well, people would always say one of a couple things. Oh, that must be really tough. Oh, those kids, man, that's gotta be tough. Good for you, huh? Not everyone can do that. It was always something to that effect, without fail. But in France, when I told people that I was a teacher, they would say, interesting, what did you do your dissertation on? What was your field of expertise? What do you find most interesting about that subject? The difference was palatable, I'm telling you. And that is just a little example of the fork in the road. It's not just the education system, it's the normalization that we have to struggle, right? That we need to work harder to just conform, and despite the way our brains work, we should just kind of get in line and shave our edges off. Well, it feels like we're running to the center of a maze that leads to nowhere. And I don't even know that we believe in the system that we're investing in. The United States spends more than most countries on education, and I don't know that we always believe in what we're doing. We celebrate people and worship people who dropped out and worked hard and slept on the floor in the factory, or went the hard route. Yet we're spending all this money in the system and then celebrating champions who buck the system. Now, let me get one thing clear. I'm not saying there's anything fundamentally totally wrong with education, or that education is bad or totally broken. I think that there are amazing programs, there are amazing schools and educators out there. I'm just saying we can do better. Can't we systemically engineer a system in favor of differently wired people? Can't we just agree that if differently wired people, neurodivergent people, have more pronounced strengths and talents, and have all this potential and have so much to give, that we can develop a system that can help them thrive and subsequently help everyone thrive? So I live in Los Angeles, and many of my friends are really quirky creatives, right? The stereotypical directors and musicians and so forth. And when I started on this journey of developing strength-based talent development, I interviewed them. I asked them how they got to where they are, what do they attribute to their success based on their different profiles. And many of them told me these really interesting stories, and I kind of led to this aha, that most neurodivergent people are successful despite their education, not because of it. Let me say that again. Most neurodivergent people are successful despite their education, not because of it. And that's a big problem. That these people have deep-seated passions and talents, and they're not only not developed in school, but they were actually suppressed. Many of my friends actually failed out or struggled in school and then went on to find success on their own. My musician friend was sneakily writing music in the back, would only go to school when he could go into the computer lab. My director friend was going to school just for inspiration because of all the characters, and he would write stories and shoot shorts on the weekend. The reality is that they both got in trouble for their passions, and instead of having a mentor help them develop them. And talking to these guys gave me this really funny visual. I don't know why, but my brain jumped to a young George Lucas. I started thinking about little George in 3rd or 4th grade, and he's at one of those old, like top lifting desks, and he's working on his doodles and stuff. He's creating galaxies and universes, what we know as Star Wars now. And at some point, some math teacher had the audacity to say, "George, put your doodles away, it's time to pay attention to math," right? And It sounds absurd there, but think about it. This is someone who's created an internationally celebrated franchise that we belong to, that we relate to. And at some point, that was a side project, right? That was something that maybe could have been really developed, yet it wasn't. So, in all seriousness, this aha led me to bigger questions. And those questions are this. If the characteristics of people who are successful in spite of their education cause their success, can't we just find those characteristics and develop them in school, right? More importantly, can't we just replicate this? Can't we just replicate this kind of success in the education system? And to answer these questions, I turn to Dr. Joseph Renzulli, a very important educational psychologist. Dr. Joseph Renzulli, the one with the amazing quote from before, said this idea of strength-based talent development enrichment. He said gifted behaviors occur at certain times, in certain people, and under certain circumstances, challenging the idea that we have of giftedness. Dr. Renzulli said that there are 3 clusters of traits which combined together can yield gifted behaviors. Number 1, above average ability. Number 2, task commitment. And number 3, creativity, something which is often left out of school altogether, and some might argue is actually a better predictor of success. Renzulli went on to say that schools need to create creativity and task commitment in areas that they may have a particular interest in. And this is key. Interest is at the center of everything, right? Our students need to develop their strengths and talents and build learning around them, not the other way around. Renzulli helps us understand that intelligence, like giftedness that we talked about before, is not fixed. And actually, that they're more of a set of behaviors that can be developed. And this is massive. With these 3 elements, theoretically, we can help our neurodivergent youth find and develop their own strengths and talents and live better lives, create a better society. And we can do it creating a better environment. Most environments are not necessarily yielding to this, but we can. All of these places are ripe with inquiry and creativity and curiosity. And in my own time in this space, over the last 15 years, first as a teacher and then as the director of a school, I have extended the work of Dr. Joseph Renzulli and added 2 other elements which I call the X and the Y axis of success. And you can think of these as kind of 2 ingredients of success. Number 1 is the X axis. Our neurodivergent students need to be with like-minded peers. It sounds obvious, but let me give you an example. I have an 11-year-old girl at my school with a 179 IQ. To put that in perspective, Einstein was believed to be around 160 or so. She cannot hang out with like-minded peers because she's wrestling with the weight of climate change, of comets hitting the Earth, right? Other 11-year-olds aren't caring about that. At the same time, she can't go hang out with graduate-level students because she's an 11-year-old girl and socially they're on different planets, right? So this is complex. Our students are asynchronous and they need one another. The research is abundantly clear. Number 2, the Y-axis. Neurodivergent mentors. Our students need to not only look over, but they need to look up and see adults who are just like them. If they can look up and see someone who has crossed the threshold and who lived like them and can say, I've been where you are, I can support you, and I can tell you that everything's going to be okay. I think back to Joseph Campbell's seminal book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, right? Where he introduced the concept of the hero's journey, right? The mentor comes in at this key moment and helps the hero cross the threshold. Without the mentor, the hero stops at the wall. And this is so important because our heroes need mentors. And with these 2 factors, like-minded friends and neurodivergent peers, like-minded peers and neurodivergent mentors, and Renzulli's 3 traits, the above average ability, task commitment, and creativity, we can create a can't help but thrive model for our neurodivergent heroes. Now, I know what you're thinking, great, Sam, this sounds ideal, and that's lovely, and I hear you, okay, I hear you. I know it can feel a bit overwhelming, and like societal shifts are a little, but it doesn't have to be this Sisyphusian feat. It does not have to be us constantly pushing a rock up a wall. It can be us making individual changes that span out into a collective, right? So let us make little waves that together form a tsunami. I like to say the goal isn't to bring the bottom up and fix what's wrong with us, but it's to raise the roof. And this is our moment. This is our moment to raise the roof together and to develop our zones of genius and serve the world with our gifts and our talents. So I want to ask you here and now, yes, I'm going to ask you to do something. I'd like to ask you to make a commitment with me. If you raise your hand and follow along, okay? I will lead a strength-based life. Go ahead. I will lead a strength-based life. I will commit to discovering and developing my passions and interests and talents. I will commit to discovering and developing my passions, interests, and talents. And I will help others do the same. I will help others do the same. All right, bravo. Now look around, look at the people to your left and right. Those are your accountability buddies. We see you, so don't mess this up. Okay? When we're talking about developing our strengths and talents, it is a group effort. And we're working as individuals, but we're working together. So, revisiting our heroes from before, I'd like to go back to X-Men for a moment. Professor Xavier created a school in X-Men that helped heroes find and develop their superpowers. And it seems to make so much sense. We're not trying to get every hero to have the same or develop the same power. So why are we doing that in school? Right? We need to help our youth seek and develop and cultivate their own powers. Right, X-Men? Right. Speaking of superheroes, I feel like we went on a pretty epic journey today as we first defended neurodiversity and by defining it and understanding what it is and knowing that our brains are all incredibly different and that our gifts and our talents are incredibly unique and therefore we should learn in a unique fashion. Second, we investigated the biggest obstacle standing in our way, the deficit-based education system, which is focused on outdated convergent thinking and obedience, not real learning. And number three, we uncovered steps toward living a strength-based life in our zones of genius, right? Working toward building a beautiful mosaic where we all develop our strengths and talents. And as I start to wrap up, I would like to say one thing. I spent a lot of time thinking about strength and talent development, and so much of it is context dependent. The superpower of creating water may not be all that cool in the ocean, but when there's a fire, you bet you're going to be pretty popular. At this point, I don't know that it's up to us to ever decide if our powers or strengths are worth developing. We don't always get to see the big picture. So it's our job to just explore and develop them and encourage our youth and friends to do the same. And I ask you to please, please, please let go of this goal of being well-rounded as an ideal. As you can hopefully see by now, well-rounded does not serve us well. We want to be square pegs. So friends, sharpen your edges. Do what makes you unique, and please go where meaning, purpose, and self-actualization lie. And I'd like to leave you with this. In a 2014 commencement speech, Jim Carrey famously shared a story about his father, who wanted to be a comedian and inspired Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey's father took a job as a banker thinking he would play it safe so he could provide for his family, and tragically years later he was let go of the banking job. And Jim Carrey said, "You can fail at what you don't want, so you might as well take a chance on what you do love." Heroes, don't let struggles be your story. They're just a part. Develop your powers, turn them into your superpower, and the world will be better for it. Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing about that really important topic. I think that was really eye-opening. That was really fresh perspective on education.